Gospel of John, chapter 20. Starting at verse 24. Be reading from the NIV version. Now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." I want to talk about a missed opportunity. A missed opportunity. Our faith is central in our journey in life. Without our faith, we are in bad shape. What do you do when your faith has failed you? What do you do when your faith don't meet what you thought it should meet? I mean, what do you do when that hub on the wheel and the spark comes out? What do you do? Because you know when it comes out, the wheel breaks. And that's something like our faith, that one little piece of the wheel come off. The wheel collapse. So what is it that we do when our faith has failed us? It's a strange place to be, but yet it is a place that we all have been when our faith has failed us. And when I look at this text, I think Thomas can help us understand some stuff. It is yet again between Easter Sunday and the next Sunday. And I'm amazed by how so many things took place between one Sunday and another Sunday. I'm just amazed because in 1 week, Jesus met Mary who was crying. In 1 week, Jesus showed up in a locked room with the disciples and told them, "Peace be with you." In 1 week, he did some stuff that will blow our minds away. And as I read the text, I'd never seen this before. And I focus on it over and over again. Initially reading the text, I thought all the disciples were in the room. I don't know why. I don't know if I made the assumption. I don't know what it was. But when I read the text, I realized there was one disciple that was not in the room. And I think that we can learn a lot about this disciple. And we don't know much about Thomas, but the one thing we do know is that Thomas could have been the bravest disciple there was. Now, I thought Peter was the bravest, because Peter was quick to always get up, say what he has to say, do what he got to do. Peter was quick. But when you look at the text and you go back the previous chapter, the previous pericope, you find out that Peter was with the other disciples in the room, scared and locked. So Peter must not have been the bravest disciple of them all. But I find out that Thomas might have been the bravest disciple of them all, because Thomas was not with them when they were in the room locked up. And we don't exactly know why Thomas was not with them, but we can make some deductions, because when you look at the text, the other disciples were in the room locked up because they were scared. So we do know that there was something about Thomas that he was not scared. Because if Thomas was scared, Thomas would have been in the room with the other disciples. But Thomas moved on. And you know, I think there was something about Thomas where his faith failed him. But at the same time, he was not afraid to be out by himself. There's a sense of bravery when you think about that. And see, it's interesting because Thomas really declared in some form or fashion that what he believed in at first has failed him. And now he's not with the disciples because, here goes the key word, their values and his values are not the same. See, the God that they believed in died on the cross. Jesus, their Savior, who they were with all this time, died on the cross. And though he said he was going to get back up again, and though some had saw him after he got up, Thomas still did not believe. Thomas could not understand that what Jesus said in the past, Jesus will say again. And not only that, what Jesus has declared in the past will come back to be true. So here we have Thomas, who did not believe. And listen to the audacity of Thomas. Because we find out that the disciples came and they found him. And then when we see this text, this is what blows my mind away. No matter how many times Jesus told the disciples what he needed to tell them, because the last time they were with Jesus, Jesus told them, you go out and do what you have to do. They show back up in the same location with the same issue, that they all were still scared, because the text is clear. They showed back up in the same house and the doors was locked. Now, the only difference between the doors being locked, the previous text, and the doors being locked now is that now Thomas is with them. And prior to Thomas getting there, they say to him, Thomas, we have seen the Lord. And listen to how Thomas responds back to him. He says, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. What an audacity of Thomas to make a statement. Now, we had to look at this because he said something that bothered me. Because he said, in other words, unless I have so and so, I will not. Now, he could have said, if I have so and so, I will. There's a difference when you approach the text and say, unless I have so and so, I will not. And when I look at it, that's what most of us do. Most of us look at it from a context, unless I have this, I will not do so and so. Unless this takes place, I will not believe this. Who are we to believe or to put a request to God or make any statement of what needs to take place before we believe anything? And Thomas had all that he needed to have to believe what he needed to believe. But what happened is that he chose not to believe, because of the simple reality is that his faith failed him. And here it is. He's all by himself. And I find it interesting. He could have said, if I have so and so, I will. And the difference between if I have so and so and I will, and the unless I have so and so, I will not, is this. if I have so and so and I will, that leaves room for persuasion. Unless I have so and so, I will not. That's a sense of obstinacy. I will not be moved. I will not shake. I will not do this or I will not do that unless he does this. Instead of saying, well, I leave room for persuasion. And watch this. A week later, can you imagine Thomas' agony? A week later, through all this time, Thomas goes a week not believing what the disciples had told him. What an agony to go through when you don't believe what someone else has told you. What agony to have when all that you put your trust in, now you no longer see it, but at the same time, some folk told you, we've seen the risen Christ, and you say, I still do not believe. What agony do you have to go through? And here is the issue. The issue is when Thomas believed that he was lost and by himself, Thomas distanced himself from the disciples. And I found out most of us, when our world collapsed, we displaced ourselves from the fellowship of believers. When the God we serve has disappointed us, instead of coming to church, we stay away from church. When the God we serve does not do what we want him to do, instead of coming back to the body of believers where you can get some strength, some power, and some extra courage, you stay away from the church, and your excuse is because he did not do what I asked him to do. Now, I did not always get this, but I thought about it because the other day I was cooking on a gas grill, and I realized how important it is for me to have a grill for coals. You know, you put the coal in there, and I don't really like messing with all that stuff. But at the same time, I realized the power of this because have you ever noticed when the coals begin to get dark and black and gray that sometimes you have to start stirring it up, and when they start touching each other, the fire take place and the coal begins to get red. So instead of being black, dark, and gloomy, now the fire take place. Well, that's just like it is for us as believers. Sometimes when stuff don't go your way, or sometimes when stuff is not what you thought it should be, and you're disappointed in God, when you stay away from the believers, you can't get the touch that you need to get in order to stay live and on fire for God. So in other words, some of us walk around because we're not close to the body of believers. Look at it.
Go ahead.
He was by himself, lonely. Do you know how it is to be isolated? When you're isolated, what seems to be a small problem is now a large problem. When you're isolated, what used to hurt you now has been magnified. When you're isolated and you no longer hear the truth of the gospel, sometimes you forget about all that he had did. Because look at it, in his isolation, he forgot about the fact that God fed the multitude of 5,000. He forgot the fact that he told Lazarus to come forth from the tomb. He forgot the fact that he met blind man Bartimaeus and he opened up his eyes because he was all isolated by himself and he had no one to talk to. And my brothers and my sisters, the worst thing that you can do is to isolate yourself from the church, even if the church has hurt you. Because it's only in the body of believers where you get what you need to get to continue on down the journey. Yeah. Watch this. So now, he's lonely, and all of a sudden, they're back in the room. And the reason why I know the disciples did not get what Jesus said at the last time is because they brought him back in the same spot, believing that, well, if he showed up last time, Jesus will show up again. And I guess that's a good assessment to believe. But he didn't show up for them.
But when he showed up, he still gave them what they needed because he said, peace be with you. Now notice, the peace he gave to them before must have been gone because now he's saying it to them again, peace be with you. I am amazed by when God can tell us one thing before we forget about it, and oftentimes God has to repeat it to us over and over and over and over again because we refuse to believe what he said the first time. And that's what Jesus said to the disciples the first time. Listen, he said, peace be with you. But now that I done healed your spirit, let me deal with the person that there's a problem with. And then he looks at Thomas. And now he does not think about the other disciples. He focuses on Thomas. And here we find out where Thomas missed his greatest opportunity. Because look what happens. He says, Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. And here we have stop doubting and believe. In other words, whenever you doubt, there must be some sense of fear in you. So where you have fear and you have doubt, you can't do what God would have you to do. And he's kind of clear with Thomas because he said, stop doubting. And we pass over the word, but this word in all essence is deeper than what we think. It's not just this simple doubt thing. What he ultimately said, when you look down into the root of the word, what he's really saying is stop being unbelieving. So it's no longer doubt. It's stop being unbelieving. And there's so many of us who walk around today unbelieving. We walk as though God will not supply our needs. We walk as though God will not heal us. We walk as though God will not meet us in our dire time. We walk as though God will not do what God said he would do. We act as though we are unbelieving. And the unbelieving is what messed us up because, listen, Jesus looked at Thomas and said, look at my hands. Look at my side. Now, some folk would think that Thomas reached out and touched him. I don't technically see that in the text. What I see is that as soon as Jesus showed Thomas the marks, right? Listen, Thomas' statement prior was, unless he showed me where the nails were, unless he showed me where the side was wounded, unless he showed me his hands. Now listen, y'all, Jesus wasn't there when Thomas said that. But now Jesus responds back by doing the very thing that Thomas declared he needed to have. Oh my God. In other words, Jesus will meet us wherever Jesus needs to meet us to satisfy whatever he needs to satisfy. Because here is where Thomas' mind gets blown out. And this is how I know Thomas did not reach his hand out. Because Thomas caught a glimpse. Hold up. Jesus, you was not with me when I said what I said. So how is it that you repeat the very thing that I told you that I needed? All right. And when he did that, listen to his response. Because his response says, my Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. In other words, my Lord and my God. You've heard all that I've said. You understand all of my pain. You understand all of my hurt. And you still met me where I needed to be met at. My Lord and my God. What a testimony to have. But here we go. Watch where the missed opportunity come in. Because he received the witness. But what did he not receive that the other disciples did get? Okay, look, the other disciples saw the same thing that Thomas saw. But what happened was, with the other disciples, Jesus breathed the Spirit into them. He did not give Thomas the Spirit that he gave the other disciples. And there goes the greatest opportunity when you miss being with the fellowship of believers. Sometimes you miss out what God is willing to give you from the outset. You do not get the entire picture, because if he would have been with the other disciples, he would have caught the revelation a long time ago. But he still did not catch the entire revelation, and neither did Jesus give him all that he gave the other disciples. And there's sometimes you miss your greatest opportunity when you don't come into God's house and experience the Spirit of God. You don't experience the Spirit of God because somehow, in some way, your faith has failed you and you refuse to go back to the house of God. What a sad place to be when you don't experience what everyone else experienced. I thought about this, and I'm done. I thought about this when we had the play on Palm Sunday. I thought about this because it was the same play, but it was not the same play. All right. And I feel like sometimes we don't show up at the same thing because we're saying to ourselves, well, they're only going to do the same thing. So there's no reason for me to show up. But at the same time, when you don't show up, something takes place that has never taken place before. That's right. And what we experienced at the play was something took place that had never taken place before. What we saw was a dramatization, but at the same time, we saw where God spoke to two kids to come and give their life to Christ. So we missed the opportunity to see God move in such a way like he had never moved it before. And I wonder about some of the folk who never showed up. They miss the opportunity to see God operate in a way that he has never operated before because they get stuck in their minds of the attitude, unless I have so-and-so, I will not. Listen. He said, here's the difference between if I have, unless I will not. Here's the difference. Do you remember Abraham? When God told Abraham, take your only child up to the mountain. And Abraham said to him, well, where is the sacrifice? And God said, keep on going. I will provide. He did not stay stuck. He did not say, unless you show me the sacrifice, I will do what you asked me to do. He kept on going because there's a sense of persuasion between God and Abraham. And what God wanted to find out from Abraham is, will you trust me? Because here it is, as he climbed the mountain, he had no way of understanding what